Hey y'all, welcome to On Their Birthday. I'm your host Brooke, and let me just say I'm so excited for today's episode because while I've heard of Kurt Cobain and I know who he is, I never really knew many details about his life, and so today I'm really excited to be able to tell the story of his life. But the thing is that I want to be able to tell every story I can about people because we don't always remember who they are as people, but just what they did in their life. So today's episode talks about some heavy topics that include drug addiction and sexual abuse, among other heavy topics. So if any of these are particularly hard for you, please think of yourself first. You are always welcome to come back and listen at another time or skip through a portion. And I'm going to be giving warnings beforehand before the topic gets brought up, so that if you need to prepare, you can. And my mission is to bring humanity back to people that we see on TV or hear on the radio, and not to glamorize or gloss over heavy topics. So with that being said, proceed with caution, and let's go ahead and hop into the episode. Kurt Donald Cobain was born on February 20th, 1967 in Aberdeen, Washington. He was born to parents Wendy Elizabeth and Donald Leland Cobain. Kurt's surname, Cobain, was originally spelled Cobane, coming from his Irish ancestors who were found to be shoemakers. His ancestors had settled in Canada and finally found themselves in Washington, where they stayed. Kurt was always described as a happy child who exhibited traits like being caring and sensitive to others. His interest in art was shown from an early age, as he would often draw favorite cartoon or film characters, things like Donald Duck. His grandmother, Iris Cobain, always encouraged his artistic endeavors. Kurt came from a musical background. His uncle, Chuck Frattenberg, played in the band called the Beachcombers, and his aunt, Marie Earle, played guitar and performed in various bands. And his great-uncle, Delbert, was an Irish tenor. He even made an appearance in the film King of Jazz in 1930. Kurt's Aunt Marie said that he had been singing at the age of only 2, and then by the time he was 4, he had started playing the piano as well. He went so far as writing a song about taking a trip to the park, and yes, he still was only 4. He enjoyed artists like Electric Light Orchestra, and songs that he would often sing included Hey Jude by the Beatles, Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks, and even the theme song to the Monkees TV show. Now, here's a quick trigger warning for some mentions of mental health struggles, so if you need to, just skip ahead about 15 seconds. But just like the music ran in the family, so did struggles with mental health. In 2007, Kurt's cousin had mentioned that the family had a history of suicide, mental illness, and alcoholism, and that 2 of Kurt's uncles had actually died by suicide with guns. So this was a particularly tough subject for Kurt throughout his life. When Kurt was only 9, his parents got divorced. In 1993, he had said that the divorce had a profound effect on his life. He became defiant and withdrawn, and he felt ashamed because all he wanted was to have a typical family and the security that comes with it. Both of his parents in time found new partners, and even though his father had promised to never remarry, Kurt found himself with a stepmother, Jenny Westby. They lived together along with Westby's 2 children. At first, Kurt enjoyed having a stepmother because she provided a maternal aspect of his life that he had been craving, but he still insisted that it was not his real family. However, not long after getting married, Kurt's father and Westby had a son, Chad Cobain. This shifted Kurt's place within the family, going from the only boy to an older half-brother. Kurt's mother dated a man who was a domestic abuser. One incident of violence towards her caused her to be hospitalized due to a broken arm, but she stayed because of her commitment to the relationship. While the 2 varying home lives were happening, Kurt was behaving rudely towards adults in his life, and even began to bully another boy at school. His father and stepmother took him to see a therapist that gave him the recommendation that he would benefit from a single-family environment. On June 29, 1979, Wendy, Kurt's mother, granted full custody rights to his father. But Kurt's behavior was overwhelming for his father, and so he was left in the care of family and friends. While he was living with the Christian family of his friend Jesse Reed, Kurt became a devout Christian and attended regular church services. The song Lithium is about his experience while living with the Reed family. Later, he renounced Christianity and began engaging in what was called anti-God rants. However, religion remained an important part of his personal life. Kurt participated in sports by the choice of his father. For a time, he was part of the junior high wrestling team. He was skilled as a wrestler, but despised it so much that he allowed himself to be pinned down to upset his father. Later on, his father signed him up for Little League Baseball. This didn't last long, as Kurt continued to strike out on purpose, so he never had to play. Despite all of this, Kurt still found an outlet to pursue something in school that he actually enjoyed: art. He often drew during class. One time, he was given an assignment to draw a caricature. He chose to do Michael Jackson, but the teacher told him that it was too inappropriate for the school hallway. He then chose to do what was called an unflattering caricature of Ronald Reagan. Through his art, Kurt met Roger "Buzz" Osborne, the singer and guitarist of the Melvins, an American rock band that is known to be the key to the development of both grunge and sludge metal. Buzz became his friend and introduced him to punk rock and hardcore music. Kurt even claimed that the first live show he attended was the Melvins. This is where he began to find an escape: the Pacific Northwest punk scene. At the age of 13, he had his first experience with cannabis. On Kurt's 14th birthday in 1981, his uncle offered him the choice of a bike or a used guitar. Knowing what we know of Kurt Cobain, it's no surprise that he chose the guitar. Not long after receiving this gift, he began learning to play the song "Stairway to Heaven" by Led Zeppelin. He didn't stop there, though. He learned to play "Louie Louie," "Another One Bites the Dust" by Queen, and "My Best Friend's Girl" by The Cars. He even began to take it further, working on his own songs. And here's our episode fun fact for your Kurt Cobain trivia night. Kurt actually played left-handed despite being right-handed. His time in high school was difficult because he had the desire to play music but no one to do it with. While he was at the Melvins practice space, he met Chris Novoselic, who was just as into punk rock as Kurt was. Novoselic's mother owned a hair salon with an upstairs room, which turned into their practice space. Kurt began living with his mother during his second year of high school. In 1985, just 2 weeks before he was set to graduate, he found out that he did not have enough credits to complete his high school diploma and decided to drop out. This is when he formed the group Fecal Matter, one of several of what he called joke bands that came from the friends associated with the Melvins. It features Kurt singing and playing guitar, Dale Crover, the drummer of the Melvins, playing bass, and Greg Hokanson playing drums. But because of the decision to drop out of high school, his mother told him he could either find a job or live somewhere else. 1 week after giving Kurt this ultimatum, he found that she had packed away all his belongings into boxes. In a 1993 interview, Kurt recalled feeling banished. He would hop around friends' couches and even occasionally snuck back into the basement of his mother's house. He also claimed that at times he would be living under a bridge that went over the Wishkah River. This particular experience inspired the song "Something in the Way." In late 1986, Kurt moved into an apartment after the disbandment of Fecal Matter. He was working at the Polynesian Resort in Ocean Shores, Washington, just 20 miles west of his hometown in Aberdeen. He began traveling frequently to Olympia, Washington, to attend rock concerts. During his frequent visits, he formed a relationship with Tracy Miranda. Over time, as they grew closer, their relationship grew strained. Miranda supported the relationship by working at the Boeing aircraft plant cafeteria and would often steal food. Kurt spent most of his time sleeping late, watching TV, and having sole focus on art projects, which caused him to no longer have a job. He was consuming what was described as notable amounts of LSD and was prone to alcoholism and solvent abuse. He even tried heroin for the first time, given to him by a dealer who would often supply him with oxycodone and aspirin. Miranda often sparked arguments between them because of her insistence for him to get a job. These experiences inspired Kurt to write the song About a Girl, which appeared in the Nirvana album Bleach. Not much time passed and they were separated. In 1987, a few years after meeting and playing with Chris Novoselic, Kurt tried to convince him to form a band together by giving him a demo of Fecal Matter. After months and months of asking, Novoselic finally agreed, forming the beginnings of Nirvana. Kurt was using Christian imagery in his work and had taken an interest in Jainism and Buddhist philosophy. This helped him decide on the band name. The word Nirvana was taken from Buddhist concept, something Kurt described as freedom from pain, suffering, and the external world. Despite the desire to play music, Kurt became discouraged after the early touring days because the band just wasn't pulling in the crowds that they had expected. This caused financial strain for the band. They also had a hard time in the first few years of the band keeping a drummer. Finally, the band rested on Chad Channing. He recorded with the band on the album Bleach, released in 1989 on Sub Pop Records. However, not long after, Kurt was dissatisfied with the style that Channing had and fired him. During this time, Novoselic and Kurt and members of the alternative rock band Screaming Trees formed a side project called The Jury. Kurt was on vocals and guitar, Novoselic on bass, Mark Lanigan on vocals, and Mark Pickerel on drums. Kurt was inspired to record some songs after getting a copy of Leadbelly's last sessions from a friend. After hearing it, he said that he felt a connection to Leadbelly's almost physical expressions of longing and desire. The band went on to record 2 songs over the course of 2 recording sessions on August 20th and August 28th of 1989. These songs included Where Did You Sleep Last Night by Leadbelly, and instrumental versions of Grey Goose, Ain't It a Shame by Fats Domino, and They Hung Him on a Cross that featured Kurt performing a solo. In 1990, he began dating Toby Vale, a punk vinester of the band Bikini Kill, who was known for being a central figure in the Riot Grrrl, that's girl spelled Grrl, scene. After meeting her, Kurt literally vomited because he was so overwhelmed by his infatuation with her. This particular event inspired the line, "Love you so much it makes me sick," in his song Aneurysm. This wasn't the only song he had wrote about her, as his relationship with Vale was filled with conflicting ideas. Kurt saw her as his female counterpart, but she simply saw him as a fashion accessory. His desire to have a traditional relationship due to his maternal comfort needs was seen as sexist by Vale. Kurt and Vale collaborated on a musical project called Bathtub Is Real, where they both sang and played guitar and drums. Vale later said that Kurt would play the songs that he was writing, I would play the songs I was writing, and would record them on my dad's 4-track. He was really into the fact that I was creative and into music. He was super inspiring and fun to play with. The musician Slim Moon, the founder of the label Kill Rock Stars, described the sound of Bathtub Is Real like the minimal, quiet pop songs that Olympia is known for. It was really good. Not much after this project concluded, Kurt and Vale went their separate ways. Music journalist Charles R. Cross wrote that in the 4 months following their breakup, Kurt would write a half-dozen of his most memorable songs, all of them about Toby Vale. Kurt was still sporadically using heroin, and it ended up developing into an addiction. He struggled with physical pain for a majority of his life because of chronic bronchitis and an undiagnosed chronic stomach condition. He claimed that the addiction was because he was, quote, determined to get a habit as a way to self-medicate his stomach condition. He said that it started with 3 days in a row of doing heroin and I don't have stomach pain. That was such a relief. However, his longtime friend Buzz said that his stomach pain was a result of his heroin use and that he made it up for sympathy so he could use it as an excuse to stay loaded. Eventually, Kurt and Novoselic found and hired Dave Grohl as the replacement for Chad Channing. In 1991, Dave Grohl was featured in the major label debut album, Nevermind. The lead single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, caused Nirvana to swiftly enter the mainstream, popularizing the subgenre of grunge. The success of the Nevermind album provided an avenue for larger audiences for Seattle bands such as Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden. This caused alternative rock to be the dominant genre on the radio and music television in the United States during the first half of the 1990s. Kurt originally wanted the album to be divided into two sides, a boy side that highlighted his experiences of his childhood, and a girl side about his experiences with the dysfunctional relationship with Vale. He said in an interview that he had wrote about some of his very personal experiences, feeling that death void that the person in the song is feeling, very lonely and sick. Now, here's a quick trigger warning for sexual assault, so if this is a heavy topic for you, just go ahead and skip ahead about 15 seconds. The song Polly from Nevermind was written after Kurt read a newspaper story of an incident in 1987 when a 14-year-old girl was kidnapped after attending a punk rock show. The girl was then raped and tortured with a blowtorch and managed to escape after gaining the trust of her captor through flirting with him. When Bob Dylan saw the band perform the song, he cited it as the best of Nirvana's songs and said that the kid has heart about the songwriter. Kurt found himself as the Generation X spokesman, something he resented because he believed that his artistic message had been misinterpreted by the public. He had underground roots and vision. He began to have resentment towards the people who claimed to be fans but refused to acknowledge or just straight up misinterpreted the band's social and political views. Kurt was a very vocal opponent of sexism, racism, sexual assault, and homophobia. He was very proud that Nirvana had played at a gay rights benefit concert that was in opposition of a law in Oregon that was told to teach in schools that homosexuality was, quote, abnormal, wrong, unnatural, and perverse. He felt so strongly about this particular social topic because during his school years, he befriended a gay student and was bullied by peers that assumed that Kurt was also gay. He said later in interviews that he enjoyed being associated with being gay because it meant that people left him alone. According to Kurt himself, he also used to spray paint "God is gay" on pickup trucks around his hometown. But anyways, jumping back to his social views, he was also a supporter of the pro-choice movement, which promotes the idea of allowing women the right to choose to have an abortion without the fear of being persecuted by the government. And Nirvana even performed at the Rock for Choice campaign. Because of his outspoken views on this, he received death threats from anti-abortion activists for participating in the campaign. One activist even went so far as to threaten to shoot him as soon as he stepped on a stage. On May 17, 1991, Kurt was formally introduced to Courtney Love at an L7 and Butthole Surfaced concert. Kurt had known about Love because of her role in the 1987 film Straight to Hell. As the weeks passed, Love found out through Grohl that she and Kurt had shared many interests, and so she decided to pursue him. In late 1991, they were often seen together and bonded heavily through drug use. Kurt's heroin use began to affect the band's tour. In early 1992, during a photo shoot, he was said to have fallen asleep several times because he had used heroin beforehand. On January 12, 1992, the morning after their performance on Saturday Night Live, Kurt experienced his first near-death overdose after injecting heroin. Love was the one who resuscitated him. On February 24, 1992, after Nirvana's Pacific Rim tour concluded, Kurt and Love were married in Hawaii on Waikiki Beach. Love said later that she had been warned before the wedding by Sonic Youth bassist Kim Gordon that marrying Kurt would, quote, destroy her life. But Love just responded, whatever, I love him and I want to be with him. Just a few months later, on August 18, 1992, their daughter Frances Bean Cobain was born. A sonogram from the pregnancy was part of the artwork for Nirvana's single Lithium. Love admitted in an interview that she had been on a drug binge with Kurt during the early weeks of her pregnancy, but then claimed that they had misquoted her. Later, she did admit again to using heroin before knowing that she was pregnant. Because of this, the Los Angeles County Department of Children's Services visited the household just days after Love gave birth and took them to court, stating that their drug use made them unfit parents. In October of 1992, Kurt traveled to Oregon to perform at a benefit and supported local bands with LGBTQ+ members. He recalls feeling, quote, different from the age of 7. And as I mentioned earlier, having a gay friend in school caused him to be bullied. He was asked multiple times about his sexuality and even once stated that, "I'm definitely gay in spirit, and I probably could be bisexual if I wouldn't have found Courtney." He would describe himself as being feminine in childhood and would wear stereotypical women's clothing like dresses. Their third album, In Utero, was released in September 1993 on DGC Records. Kurt regarded the album as, for the most part, very impersonal. The lyrics deal with his parents' divorce and newfound fame of Nirvana and the public image and perception of himself and Courtney Love. The lyrical themes of female anatomy and pregnancy were featured in the song Heart-Shaped Box. He wrote of fame, drug addiction, and abortion on the song Pennyroyal Tea. In the song Rape Me, it was similar to the themes discussed earlier with the song Polly. But the song Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle was probably one of the most personal songs in the album, despite having the name of a woman in the title. It has Kurt comparing himself during the early days of success Nirvana had to Frances Farmer, who notably struggled with mental health issues. He could relate, as he said, especially with Farmer's unconventional nature, her outspoken dislike of commercialism, her hounding by the media, and her sad, unjust fate. The novel Perfume, The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Susskind inspired Kurt to write the song Scentless Apprentice. The novel is about a perfumer's apprentice born with no body odor of his own but a highly developed sense of smell, and whose goal is to create the perfect scent by killing virgin women and taking their scent. This was an album full of experiences from Kurt's point of view. Kurt continued to focus on his artistic projects just like he did with his songwriting. There's a direct parallel between the songs he would write and the art he would create, having a dark sense of humor. Particular things like his fascination with physiology, his own medical conditions, and human anatomy were all things that they had in common. He often didn't have the resources that he needed to create his artwork, so instead he used unconventional materials like painting on board games and album sleeves, and the paint he sometimes used being made from his own bodily fluids. His artwork was featured throughout Nirvana's discography and music videos. On July 23, 1993, prior to a performance in New York City, Kurt suffered another overdose. Love, instead of calling for an ambulance, injected him with naloxone, otherwise known as Narcan, to resuscitate him. Kurt proceeded to perform with Nirvana shortly after, never sharing with the public or even hinting that the incident had ever happened. In October of 1993, Kurt met with poet William S. Burroughs at his home in Kansas. Earlier that year, he had played backing guitar for a spoken word recording entitled The Priest They Called Him, and Kurt regarded Burroughs as a hero. Burroughs later expressed after Kurt's death that he wasn't surprised because, quote, "It wasn't an act of will for Kurt to kill himself. As far as I was concerned, he was dead already." On March 1st, 1994, after a tour stop in Munich, Germany, Kurt was diagnosed with bronchitis and severe laryngitis. The next day, he flew to Rome for medical treatment, then was joined by his wife on March 3rd, 1994. The following morning, she discovered that he had overdosed on a combination of champagne and rohypnol, a drug used to treat severe insomnia. He was rushed back to the hospital and remained unconscious for the rest of the day. After 5 days in the hospital, he returned home to Seattle. Love later stated that this was Kurt's first suicide attempt. On March 18, 1994, Love made an emergency phone call to the police and told them that Kurt was suicidal and had locked himself in a room with a gun. When police arrived, they confiscated several guns and a bottle of pills. Kurt continued to insist that he was not suicidal and had instead locked himself in the room to hide from Love. A few days later, on March 25th, Love staged an intervention to combat Kurt's drug abuse. 10 people were in attendance, including musician friends, record company executives, and one of Kurt's closest friends. Kurt was very angry, insulting the people there to help him, and locked himself in an upstairs bedroom. By the end of the day, he had agreed to join a detox program. He went to the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles on March 30th. The staff there had no idea of his history with depression and suicide attempts, and they saw no negative state of mind when he was being visited by friends, and spent the day talking about his drug abuse and personal problems to the counselors. He even played with his daughter while there, which happened to be the last time he saw her. The next night, on April 1st, Kurt walked outside for a cigarette and hopped the fence to leave, something he had joked about earlier, saying it was a stupid thing to attempt. He took a taxi to the airport and flew back home to Seattle without telling anyone. While on the flight, he sat next to Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses. Even though Kurt had shown animosity towards the band previously, he was quoted as seeming happy. McKagan later said that he knew from all of his instincts that something was wrong. On April 2nd and 3rd, Kurt was said to have been spotted around Seattle. Love even hired a private investigator to find him, but was nowhere to be found the next day. On April 7th, the band pulled out of the 1994 Lollapalooza Festival. On April 8th, 1994, Kurt's body was discovered at his home on Lake Washington Boulevard by an electrician who had come to install a security system. At first, he had believed that Kurt was asleep because he didn't see any signs of visible trauma, but then saw a small amount of blood coming from his ear and a shotgun pointing at his chin. A high concentration of heroin and traces of diazepam were found in his body, and a dream machine built by David Woodard, a device that was meant to induce meditation by closing your eyes, but can have a negative effect if used too much, had been heavily used by Kurt leading up to his suicide. There was a suicide note found, written to Kurt's childhood imaginary friend Boda. It said that he had not felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing, for too many years now. The coroner expected his date of death to be April 5th, 1994, and his body had been there for days. He was only 27 years old. On April 10, 2014, Nirvana was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Kurt has been ranked as the 12th greatest guitarist of all time by the Rolling Stone, 45th greatest singer of all time by Rolling Stone, and 7th in the 22 greatest voices in music by MTV. In 2005, a sign was put up in his hometown of Aberdeen, Washington that read, "Welcome to Aberdeen. Come as you are." As we remember Kurt Cobain on his birthday, I think it's great to say that his legacy is all about coming as you are, no matter how strange, outspoken, quiet, or normal you may be. And while he struggled with many things throughout his life, he never let it get between him and what he believed in. He fought for others and showed immense selflessness, even when that was all he had left. Thank you so much for listening. To hear this episode with a playlist curated with songs mentioned and music intermissions, head on over to Spotify. Please share with everyone you care about, and feel free to send in your favorite person, and I'll see you on their birthday. Bye.